Good evening, everybody. Welcome for coming out on such a nice spring night. And welcome to Introduction to Medical Reserve Corps, and also to, for those who are interested in staying afterwards, we're going to do Medical Reserve Corps overview. My name is Jackie O'Brien. I'm one of the coordinators of the Bristol Norfolk Medical Reserve Corps. I'm just going to introduce our other coordinators that are here this evening. We have Anne Marie Fleming from the town of North Attleboro. Anne Marie had been our director from 2006 until this past April. And she has stepped down from that position but remains on our steering committee. Our new directors are Deb Ravel from the Board of Health in Plainville. Deb, if you could just raise your hand. And Donna Palmer is her co-director, who's out there out front, from the Norton Board of Health. I'm just going to do some housekeeping things. So, oh, I'm sorry, Debbie. Oh my goodness, I am so embarrassed. We would like to thank our host, from the Foxborough Board of Health, Pauline Clifford, who is a health agent. We have Debbie Jarvis, who is here, and Lauren Bitar, who is recording this session for us this evening. Again, my apologies. I'm not a good public speaker. So anyhow, so just some housekeeping things. We have refreshments out back. Feel free to get up anytime during the presentations to avail yourselves to them. We would ask anybody that has a cell phone, if you could do us a favor, either turn that off and put it on vibrate. We also, you can see the exit signs, they're all clearly marked, and restrooms, when you go out from where you entered, if you go to the right, there's a men's room and a woman's room right there. So our particular unit started in October of 2006, and Anne Marie got that going for us, and we've had people come and go over the years. What we would like to show you first is a video that was put together around that time that kind of explains that different people that have been involved in the Medical Reserve Corps, which started back in 2001 after 9/11. It's under the Office of the Surgeon General, and what we'll do is you will see people who have been involved in the Medical Reserve Corps, what their different takes are on being a volunteer for the Medical Reserve Corps. It's about 12 minutes in length, and certainly afterwards you can feel free to ask us any questions.
On September 11, 2001, the United States was caught unprepared. This attack, however, gave birth to a movement of volunteerism that swept across the country. Suddenly, the need for volunteers was national news, hence the birth of the Medical Reserve Corps. Their mission is to establish teams of local volunteer medical and public health professionals who can contribute their skills and expertise throughout the year, as well as during times of community need. In 2005, for example, MRC volunteers from across the country went to help the victims of Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma. Thousands of volunteers donated their time and talents to help people whose lives were devastated. Locally, MRC volunteers went into action at Otis Air Force Base as Katrina's victims arrived. In Massachusetts, there are dozens of MRC units, stretching from the Cape to the Berkshires. Each unit helps their local community, but each unit needs volunteers. For the next 15 minutes, you'll hear from active MRC members here in Massachusetts. Their words will hopefully show you that volunteering for the MRC is both fulfilling a need in the community, as well as fulfilling a need in their hearts.
I joined the MRC because I wanted to give back to my community.
I joined it because I think it's important work.
It allowed me to volunteer at Camp Edwards.
It takes me out of myself and I get evidence that I am helping other people.
I joined the MRC because I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to volunteer to help people, use my skills that I have, and give back to the community.
I joined the MRC because I'm a medical professional and I felt like it was very important for me to join an organization, a volunteer organization here in Amherst in Hampshire County, where I could give something back to the Amherst community and be involved on a public health level in my own community, in my own town. It felt very important to me.
I joined MRC to really help support the community, to support my family, and to really learn how to better my community that I live in.
Well, I think the MRC and programs, organizations like it are very important to communities when we try to deal with some of the potential emergencies that could strike at any moment.
In an emergency, every person is going to be concerned both about their own personal safety but also their family. So I really wanted to know what I needed to do as a community member to be prepared personally. And if I do that, if I'm prepared ahead of time, then I will be available to help others. If I don't prepare in advance, I'll be using the time when it's initially an emergency to get my own act together. And I want to have that kind of organized ahead of time so that I can be sure that everybody in my family is okay and then focus on contributing to the community and making sure everybody else is okay.
You don't need to be a practicing medical professional to be an MRC member. We need folks of all varieties of skills and skill levels. If folks feel like they're rusty, they haven't been involved in the health community for a while, that's fine too. There's a role for everyone.
Dentists can join, LPNs, RNs, pharmacists. We have a great need for anyone. We actually, from Chelmsford, have a funeral director and his wife, who is a retired nurse.
If you think about a doctor's office, you have the doctors and nurses, but you also have that cadre of support staff that helps make the office run. And so we need all of those kinds of individuals.
I think that there is room in a Medical Reserve Corps for people to help with organization and distribution of information and medications, other things that may be necessary.
I have absolutely no medical background except as a patient, and not very often, but I think there are administrative tasks that you could do without a medical background. You can help a flu clinic. Certainly if the avian flu, God forbid, ever hits, there are going to be many, many chores that somebody like me could do. You can sign people up, you can take medical history. You don't need a medical background for that.
My mother was a nurse and my brother was an EMT, but I don't have a medical background per se. My education was in math, science, and engineering. I don't have a medical background, but I can contribute with the MRC in communications, and there are many non-medical tasks that the MRC needs that I can contribute to.
People who are, lay people who are just citizens who want to help out. There's so many kinds of jobs in the case of an emergency that those people can do. Helping people line up, there's just so many things that can be done. And to be in that role will make a person feel like they're contributing, they're helping, they're important. It's as simple as that, and then all the way to physicians or nurses or doctors or social workers like myself who have a skill that is needed in a disaster that can be put to use because they've already been pre-screened and that they've gone through training and that they have a relationship with the other helpers. All of those things are working in concert together. So anybody who is breathing and has a sense of humor can help out, I think.
It's a group of dedicated people who really, truly want to help. And that's important. And they'll just work together toward that common goal of making sure that these people in disasters have what they need. And you can't ask for more than that, than to work with people who are really dedicated and really want to do it.
There's no standard for training in the Medical Reserve Corps because each unit can pick what's appropriate for its own area. For example, the MRC in Boston would be very different from one out in the Cape versus one out in Amherst, for example, which is more rural.
We've done a wide variety of training. We've done everything from communications and the incident command system, which is the way that emergency responders talk to each other. It's the way that we interact on an emergency level. It's how we get messages and resources
to each other in an emergency. So that's a very crucial part of training, is talking about the incident command system.
So far, there have been a series of trainings and seminars, including CPR, the avian flu, sort of managing emergencies like on a public health level. And actually, some of the information I've learned through this training has enabled me to answer some of the patient questions that I deal with on a daily basis.
We've had 2 what are called mass dispensation sites, where we actually set up a site, what it would actually look like if, for instance, there was a measles pandemic and we needed to vaccinate 5,000 people in the course of 2 days. And we actually set up that situation and have volunteers come through so that we can know exactly how we would get people through some experience like that efficiently and safely.
I've been involved in several of the trainings, and I look forward to some of the other trainings. I've taken the behavioral health training, and I'm signed up for learning more about incident command and communication so I can support clinicians if there is an emergency in town.
It's fun in that you're hanging out with people, it's relaxed, it's getting to know you. It's not always fun because the things that you're dealing with are difficult. So it's not just all fun and games. There's real skills like doing the CPR training. We're doing the rape, aggression, defense training. You know, it's hard stuff that you're dealing with, but the way that it's done is they know we're volunteers. They know our time is precious, and so I feel like it's kind of a mix of taking things very seriously and at the same time, you know, doing it in a way that's enjoyable, that makes you want to give up an evening a month.
If for nothing other than the emergency training, the CPR and the first aid, I think it's worthwhile. If you don't do it for any other reason, that's a good reason to do it.
Time commitment is basically whatever people have to offer. For example, there is some basic training we encourage people to have, at least an introduction and overview to the Medical Reserve Corps, so they know what we're about. But some people are very involved. They attend all of our trainings. They're available for flu clinics, health fairs, blood pressure clinics, community service activities. But some people are very stretched thin and they only want to be available if there's an emergency. And that's okay too.
Well, the commitment was that we'd be willing to come to meetings on a monthly basis and also take part in whatever events the MRC plans, either be they public relations events, planning events, or actual staging of either practice events or actual emergencies.
You can put in as much time as you have, and everything is welcome. You're always made to feel welcome. So if you only have an hour, use the hour. If you have more time, use it. It depends on the month and what you do. I don't think the time commitment should be anything that stops somebody from joining.
They schedule it very nicely. It's the courses that they have are generally offered at 2 different times, a daytime time or an evening time. So I have found that between the choices that they give, I'm able to not attend all of them, but attend many of the lectures.
MRC doesn't put a lot of demands on me. It's when they need help, a broadcast will go out. A broadcast in this case is oral communication, a phone call or an email. And if I can fit it into my schedule, I'll respond to it. If it was a real disaster, I would definitely respond to it because the disaster is going to take precedence over everything that I do, with the exception of my family.
There's no doubt that being a part of this Corps takes time, and anybody who is going to be a part has to sort of commit some time. And as a doc, we're used to sort of squeezing out every bit of that time. So to paraphrase, you know, we try to get 26 hours out of 24 hours.
I think that what struck me this year was that I didn't have time, but that this was so important. And for me as a person, as someone who was fortunate enough to become a physician, it was extremely important that I be able to share my knowledge to help to take care of people who are in a very bad way. So I think there's always time to make time for important causes.
I am a busy person. I work 30 hours a week. I have 4 children, and it is busy. But if it's something that you're passionate about, if it's something that you're really interested in doing, it's easy to get involved.
It really is a small investment of time that generates a greater return. You know, I think I'm getting much more back than what I am giving.
The MRC is needed because right now hospitals are really at capacity in terms of their ability to serve the public. And if there is an extra burden placed on the hospitals by a flu epidemic or some other medical catastrophe such as the hurricane, hospitals will be stretched beyond their limits and will need extra medical personnel to help out.
We need volunteers. We need people who, if you think about what goes on in sort of the day-to-day activity of a medical center, everybody there is needed to be there to do what has to be done. And that doesn't change just because there's a disaster someplace. So if something else comes up, we need more people. And to have that separate organization running parallel to what goes on a day-to-day basis in the medical centers and clinics around the city is very important.
I think it's unfortunately, it's vital. Unfortunately, we hope the disaster or emergencies never happen, and at the same time, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We need to be prepared.
People volunteer for many different reasons, but central among those is the idea of giving something back. Many people are very busy in their lives, and so therefore their level of commitment varies. And what we want to do is provide an opportunity here to attract people at whatever level they can make that commitment. If they want to be involved just in case if there's an emergency, we can accommodate them. If they want to be more involved, participate more in the trainings, we can accommodate them there as well.
You're getting a hands-on, how to, what can I do, education. You're getting a chance to socialize with other people. You can make connections. I think you can make of this what you want to make of it.
I'm very happy I did it. I hope my skills, my varied skills, won't be used that frequently. I hope that there won't be a disaster that demands the use of my skills or my presence as a helper. But whether it's an MRC event or a CERT event, it makes no difference. If they really need me, I'm there to help.
Very good basic idea of what the Medical Reserve Corps is about. You know, they talked about avian flu back in 2005. That was a huge concern. And then in 2009, 2010, we actually experienced H1N1. Luckily, it wasn't as bad as what they thought it was initially going to be, but we survived that, and a lot of that we wouldn't have been able to do without our Medical Reserve Corps members when we were doing our seasonal flu clinics and the H1N1 flu clinics. Some of the other things that they also talk about are the monthly meetings. We actually don't do that in our particular unit. I think when we first started at the individual towns and cities, we would do that, but we've kind of gotten away from that. What is nice is that we do offer a nice variety of trainings, both what we consider our basic trainings, like tonight, the Incident Command, the National Information Management System, which Anne Marie will talk about a little bit more. But again, we also have a variety of trainings like CPR, and we've done things like Lyme disease, tick-borne illness, mosquito-borne illness, shelter management. I mean, we've really had this past year quite a few trainings. The other nice thing is too, as we have become more established, we actually have a lot more volunteer opportunities, and we've actually had volunteer deployments where we've helped supplementally staff shelters, or whether we've been requested from other MRC units to take part in disaster drills. So we offer those to our volunteers. And the nicest thing about the whole part of being a Medical Reserve Corps volunteer is the flexibility. If you're able, you want to, you're able to do it. And if you can't, then that's fine too.
So I want to apologize. I'm going to have a few pictures from 9/11. So if there's someone who lost a loved one, I apologize. Because I know that's something that still is difficult for everybody to this day. And if anybody had a loved one or a friend that was involved with the marathon bombing again, that was something that was just so recent, and I just want to let you know, I'll go quick over that. It just is just part of what we're talking about. So this is a slide from 9/11. That was when the MRC really came into being, as Jackie said and was mentioned there. This really could be a picture of the aftermath of the marathon bombing. It really could. The difference is that what you're not seeing in that picture are MRC volunteers, because there weren't any at 9/11, but they were there actually at the marathon. They were not there to be an immediate response personnel. They're not fire, they're not police, and usually the Medical Reserve Corps is not involved right in an aftermath of a disaster. We come afterwards where we help out, but there were volunteers there manning first aid tents. And so they did what they always do, is help out. So you had volunteers that were bringing people to the first aid tents. And really, that's one of the things why we try to get our volunteers prepared, because we never know. Something that has been going on for years with no problems, in a second things change. But this is just something that, for you to think about. Just need to, okay, we're gonna talk about difficulties? No. Sorry, I do not want a new slide. Here we go, slideshow. Or, yeah, there we go. So that's just a couple of pictures. So the Bristol Norfolk Medical Reserve Corps, that's what this is about. That is a group of 8 cities and towns. You heard some of those earlier. We have a number here from Attleboro. Jackie, I can't remember if she mentioned, but she's a coordinator from Attleboro. Pauline, Debbie Jarvis, and Lauren Buttar all handle the Foxborough chapter, and again, we thank them for this nice facility. Norton with Donna Palmer. North Attleboro, myself. Mansfield, we pretty much all kind of cover that right now. We do not have a dedicated coordinator for that, but we do take volunteers from Mansfield, and they're welcome to participate in any of the Medical Reserve Corps functions that we have. Plainville, as you know, with Debbie Ravel. Rehoboth, right now, Bob Ashton is a health agent, and he's kind of coordinating that chapter. And Seekonk has Beth Halal. So the MRC 101 is a mandatory for credentialing. But the nice thing about it is it actually gives you more information, in-depth information, what we do, our philosophies and organization. So this is the agenda basics. Introductions, we had introductions before. Just what is an MRC and our mission statement, unit and volunteer responsibilities, core competencies, which is our areas that we concentrate on. Just a real brief touch on the National Incident Management System and Incident Command System. That's a very important part of what we do because it gives us structure and knowledge of who to report to during whether it's a program like this or whether it's a deployment where we may be going to provide some assistance to people, questions and answers, and then resources. So we talk about what is a Medical Reserve Corps. As was mentioned earlier, that the need for it arose from the lessons learned, because what happened with September 11th is a lot of volunteers showed up to help. The problem was that nobody knew who they were, they couldn't check IDs, there was no coverage under liability laws, no one knew what their role was, where to go, or who to report to. It really showed a need. And as we know, large-scale disasters or emergencies will quickly overwhelm the emergency response systems. Currently, fire and police have a phenomenal system. They have mutual aid. So if a community has a problem and they need more help, they can call out and they can get more assistance. They can call for ambulance strike teams. They can call for other police from other communities. What happened was public health did not have that. There was no mechanism in place where they could call volunteers, where they knew what their credentials, that if they said that they were doctors or nurses, you could verify that yes, in fact, they were. or if you had non-medical volunteers that we knew that they were someone that had a quarry, so we knew that they were safe to be around vulnerable people. We know that people want to help, and people will come to help. So what we want to do is we want to just tell you about the MRC concept. It makes sense to pre-train and pre-credential volunteers before a disaster strikes. That is what we're about. We want to make sure that people who are involved or who want to help have a foundation, a basic idea of what to do, and also know that there is structure within a command system. The MRC gives that opportunity. And the statement we really like is that prepared communities mean prepared states and prepared nation. But what it should start with first is prepared individuals, because that's where it starts. Even if you never want to go outside of your own community, you're very happy just doing things within your own community. If you, yourself, or your family is prepared, you will be able to help someone else or help during a difficult time. If you're not prepared yourself personally, then you won't be a help to anyone. You'll need that help. So part of what we want to do is to help you to be better prepared yourself personally, and then go on to the next steps. So all our units are community-based. There are multiple Medical Reserve Corps units across the nation, across the state. There's more than 44 within Massachusetts alone. We are one of 4 Bristol Medical Reserve Corps units. We have the Greater Fall River, the Greater New Bedford, and Greater Taunton are kind of our sister Medical Reserve Corps. We do a lot of training with them. We do a lot of opportunities with them. But there are other MRC units. There's a Cape Cod Medical Reserve Corps unit. The Plymouth has multiple within there. Brockton and Bridgewater all have Medical Reserve Corps units. And if you go on the website, there's a state MRC website. You can get information about them as well. And some of the other websites for different MRC units have a lot of information about programs they offer. Might give you an idea if there's something that we don't offer. You can look at those websites and say, you know, this might be a good one to offer. So if you're thinking that, other people are thinking that as well. And one of the other things that we talked about being community-based is that response is always local. We talk about, as some of you may already know, if you are in the police or fire field or someone who's in Red Cross, that the communities are going to have to be on their own for about 72 hours. That's really the statistic that they say. If there's a local disaster, plan to help yourself for about 72 hours before state and federal resources will come in. This just talks about the structure, kind of from the top. As Jackie had mentioned earlier, we fall under the Department of Health and Human Services at this time, under the Surgeon General. There's some talk that it may perhaps be moved underneath emergency management. And underneath there's Freedom Corps, Citizen Corps, the CERT teams, Fire Corps. There's also the national program that I mentioned. This gives you a web page to look for the national site, the Massachusetts web page. What I mentioned about those other Bristol units, we collaborate in what we call the Region 5 Bristol County Public Health Coalition. That's for Plymouth, Cape Cod, and we're Bristol County, and then the other units there. So the Citizen Corps, that just shows you the umbrella that it falls underneath. And as I mentioned, some of the others, some of you may be familiar with that, the Citizen Emergency Response Teams, the Fire Corps, the Volunteers and Police Service, all fall under that same umbrella of Citizen Corps units. This is our mission and our motto, really the heart of who we are, what we want to do, which is to train and pre-credential volunteers to assist with an all-hazards response to disasters, emergencies, and public health initiatives in Bristol County. That's a mouthful. So what does that mean? That means that we want to give you the skills, the abilities, that you'll be able to respond and be trained if you choose to, depending on what kind of emergency, but also to help out possibly in public health initiatives, things that were mentioned earlier, things like flu clinics, health fairs, There might be the Boston Marathon. That's where that came with volunteers, with the MRC volunteers. They weren't there because it was a disaster initially. They were there for a public health initiative to provide first aid and support. And unfortunately, it turned into a disaster, and then they helped at that time. So we have a motto that was actually a motto that was thought up by the New Bedford MRC. It's be informed, be prepared, and be a volunteer. That emergency preparedness is everyone's responsibility. And that really tells you what we want for you, to be informed about what things you may need to help you so that you would be prepared. And we hope, of course, that you'll be a volunteer, whether it's at your local chapter level or whether it's out with other cities and towns or perhaps Bristol County. There's a lot of opportunities that will give you for that. So we talk about the purpose. The purpose is to draw health professionals and non-medical personnel to help us with different things. We want to create a framework to match your skills where you are at today, whether you are currently working in a field, if you're retired and may have time to be able to volunteer to help the unit. We have an opportunity for every volunteer, no matter what. I'm sure we can find something that you'll like and something that you'll want to do. And we want to train volunteers to respond appropriately with the different programs, and we'll go into that a little bit later. And the skills that you're taught will enhance the response at your local level and help your community be better prepared. We want to provide a reserve capacity. It's something when we had talked about H1N1, when we had flu clinics for H1N1, I don't know what we would have done without our Medical Reserve Corps volunteers. They helped staff. There were nurses that helped give the injections. We had other volunteers that did registration. We had what we called flow facilitators that would direct people which way to go. There was a lot of people. And if you have people that you know are trained, you're familiar with them, they can also be used as leaders, as unit leaders, and they may be able to oversee other people. I had a volunteer in my town who has been working with me for a number of years, and so she actually oversaw registration, and she was someone I knew I could count on because I knew her. She knows incident command system, and that made it easier and helpful. So we talked about would we be prepared, and these are just some quick slides I'm going to go through, just talks about would we be prepared if this happened, because some of this already has. This is actually hurricane, now not locally, but that's the types of things we see in our area to think about. In New England, what are the types of things that we see? Anthrax, hopefully not. Train disasters, hopefully not, but the potential is there. Many of our communities have railways that go through, and you never know. Now this is more typical. Sorry about that. For New England, when you think about what types of disasters do we see? We see snowstorms and ice storms. We see hurricanes. We've been seeing heat waves. Heat waves is something that are a public health issue and needs a public health response. So one of the things that we've been talking about is the need for cooling stations, having shelters where people would be able to go. We have already had shelters during snowstorms when people were out of electricity. Attleboro has hosted a regional shelter more times than I could say over the last couple of years. And it's been hard because our communities can be impacted, so we cannot help. If your house is without power, you have to take care of your family first. And then hopefully a community that has power, say Mansfield or North Attleboro, not to like stress North Attleboro. But really, you know, this is the type of thing that you can help out in the way that you can at a time that you can. Pandemic flu. Now that was interesting. When this was first set up, pandemic flu was not on our radar. And then came H1N1. This is a picture of the flu of 1918. Thank goodness we did not get the flu of 1918. We got a milder version. But the potential was there. And we had a lot of discussion about what would we do if we had to do something like this. Who would be there to help us? We look at this all the time and say, well, you know, we have maybe 10 good volunteers. We hope to get more. But 10 is, believe it or not, is a good start. If we each community had 10 good volunteers who were trained, those 10 may be able to train 5 underneath them, and they may be able to train others. So that's why our goal, that's why you're here today, we hope, is that you might be interested in doing some of these things. Emergency dispensing site, like I mentioned about H1N1. We haven't had a flu like that since, but of course we know what's coming up, and the discussion is about that H7N9. We don't know where that's going to go. Who knows if we may have to have some mass vaccination sites. Would we be prepared? We hope we would be prepared. So we say not without your help, because that's what we need really, is your help to do this. And we say disaster can strike any time. It can take any kind of form. It might be a local disaster. It could be something just within one building or one part of a community with flooding. It could be something across a whole region. It makes a difference about our response and the response that we would give. So we say being prepared makes sense when you look at that. So we want to talk about a few things, because people hear Medical Reserve Corps and they immediately think about the military. There is definitely no military connection. Once you sign on the dotted line, you're not committed for so many years. We're not going to send you to boot camp and you're going to find yourself, you know, having to give us X amount of years of your life. And what was mentioned earlier is the term Medical Reserve Corps can really be daunting to some people, because they'll say, well, I'm not a medical volunteer, I'm not a doctor, a nurse, a paramedic, I'm not some other type of medical personnel. That's an unfortunate. If there was a different label, it perhaps may help people to realize that non-medical people, as was mentioned before, are very essential. You definitely need at least 1 to 10 ratio for every medical person. You need 10 support. When we did our flu clinics, we had our greeters, we had our registration people, we had our flow facilitators, we had people that would work with the kids to distract the kids. We had a number of people, non-medical personnel. But of course we do want medical personnel, so I don't want to stress that, overstress that. So as I said, no medical ties. So one of the things just to talk about is our responsibility as leaders. What is our responsibility to you? So we tried to develop policies, procedures, and protocols that let you know what you need to do, where you fall into things. The credentialing. We have the process. We have the mass response, which is a way where you can go online, fill out your information, do the query there, bring your query information to us locally, or it can be also done at the chapter level. And that really, we do that for security, for protection, because that way we know that our volunteers who are going to work with vulnerable people have been screened. Because a lot of times we may work with those who are the most vulnerable, whether it's the very young, the very old, people in distress. They're vulnerable and they could be a target to somebody who has perhaps not their best interest at heart. Every 1 to 2 years we'll do query checks, depends on the policy. It's the best protection, though, as well as having the queries, is to get to know each other, to feel comfortable, so we get to know you. That's one of the best protections. Oh, let me go back, because I didn't talk about the training. Our responsibility is to try to provide trainings for you, trainings that will give you some of the skills that we talked about that would enable you to be able to respond. I don't think it's on, I have to check the next slide, but for your part, we hope that you will suggest trainings. There may be trainings that we haven't offered that perhaps isn't on our radar, but you've heard about or you think you'd like more information. Let us know. We'd love to get people involved, you know, to tell us trainings they'd like to do, and perhaps even work on getting trainers if they know any. And then communication. It's our responsibility to communicate to you. Right now, we use Hotmail. I don't know who here is on our Hotmail account, have been getting emails from us. Anybody here? Okay, there's a few of you. One of the things I want to make sure that you give us an email address, because you will get on our Hotmail account and you'll probably get more emails maybe than you want to. No, hopefully not. But we want to give you information about opportunities. We never want to be a pest. The idea is just the opportunities are there for you. You can choose to attend or not. But the important thing is that we reach out to you, because we want you to know what's out there, what opportunities are there. So the next portion is the volunteer responsibilities. We have a code of conduct. Basically, it talks about confidentiality, because depending on what you're involved in, you may have access to confidential information, health information, a person's age. That can be really stressful for someone. A lot of times when we were doing flu clinics, they wouldn't fill in their age and would have to ask. You know, they want to know that people aren't going to be broadcasting, and it's going to be on Facebook saying, oh, did you know so-and-so was that old? We don't want to have to worry about that. Also talks about common sense type of things as well. And then we have an activation process for deployment. I'll go into that a little later, because we want people to wait to be deployed when we give that okay, not what we call self-deploy, that if you see a disaster, you go on your own. It needs to be official. It needs to come from the coordinators there. So these are just some of the training and readiness. I mentioned core competencies. Those are areas. The next few slides are just going to touch real quick on some of those. So these are some of the things. What you saw tonight is the MRC overview. That was that little DVD that you saw, and then the MRC 101. That is required. That's part of being credentialed, part of where you can then perhaps volunteer with other units, that they know that you have had the CORI, that you have the incident command system, so you know what the command structure is. The CPR and first aid, that is suggested just for people's personal information, but it is required for clinical. For nurses, it is a required, and it's a good thing to have. Some of you may have already done that National Incident Management. Boring, but you know, it's one of those required, it's kind of like schoolwork, you know, you have to do it to graduate. Well, it's kind of like that as well. And it's something you can have classes here. Foxborough has been great about getting Colonel Gavigan, who puts a lot of great humor into his presentations. It's also available online. So you could actually go onto our webpage and you can actually click onto it and you can take it online and go from there. You don't get Colonel Gavigan's great stories, but you can get it done. Same thing with the incident command structure. And that's something that anyone who is in police or fire or emergency management will be very familiar with that. Personal preparedness plans. That's what we were talking about earlier, where you need to be prepared. Do you have a plan for your family? Do you have a place that you would meet in a disaster, or know, have your family, how to contact you, that type of thing. And then communications. And some of that is perhaps we've had a class before. We had a fire chief from North Attleboro who taught about communication and using walkie-talkies. Those of us who don't use those regularly, we get a little stymied when we have a walkie-talkie and we forget to push the button when we should, or forget to let go when we should. So that's a really important thing. Liability is something that unfortunately right now we do not have a state liability. It's a personal liability, what you're willing for yourself to do. Nurses have malpractice insurance. Everyone should have a personal malpractice in a clinical field. But there's a Federal Volunteer Protection Act. When there was the H1N1, the state activated the federal government, enacted the Federal Protection Act so that all the H1N1 volunteers were protected who volunteered for that, because it was something that was necessary. There's Good Samaritan laws, there's the Mass Tort Claims Act, and then the state emergency declarations. And that's something, some units are able to have their MRC volunteers declared special workers for the town, and that gives them some information about there. But the bottom line is, you know, what you yourself, what amount of liability do you feel that you can do? Because we all have a risk every day when we walk out our front step, just walking the street, things can happen. Ice happens, accidents happens. So one of our responsibilities is to make sure that we give you good information about what a situation is, what is involved, and what your risks may be. So the core competencies, there's actually 8 of them. They're created by the Surgeon General. I'm just going to put these up here because we go on to each of those a little later. And there are different classes that fall under these core competencies, so that you may have a class that's not necessarily called a core competency, but will fall underneath these different areas. So some recommendations that we also talk about is practicing healthy habits, especially during flu season. As public health people, we like that idea. So this is the first one, personal protection protocols, personal protection equipment. We do a class that talks about personal protective equipment, what to take on, what to have, gloves. If you think you might be exposed to blood and body fluids, depending on what you're doing, is knowing what you might need to have to protect yourself, what you should ask for, depending on the emergency you're going into. When the firefighters responded to Katrina and the response there, you know, they were wading in deep water, and that was a personal protective equipment that they had to go and find that they didn't initially plan on. But there was a lot of things in the waters, and people broke down with rashes and things like that. So this is actually there's 2 classes where you'll learn about the personal protection plan and then equipment. So when we talk about the protection planning, there's 3 areas we like to mention: your head, your hands, your home. So the first thing, your head, is having knowledge, you know, knowing what to do in an emergency, in a snowstorm, how to take care of yourself and your family, and having plans that address that. In your hands, having a go kit or a piece of equipment. A go kit is something that we talk about. What that is that if you are going to assist at a shelter or be going someplace, you should have a bag that has whatever equipment and supplies you might need for the period of time you're going to be there. Change of clothes, eyeglasses, medications, phone charger, you know, different things like that. You want to make sure that you have that, such as for your family, if you may have to go to a shelter, a go kit for going to a shelter. What's included in that? Same thing, change of clothes, maybe food. If you have to leave your home, you want to make sure that you have the information you need, such as perhaps bank information or contact information. You want to make sure you have that ready. And that's one of the things that we do in different trainings, to talk about what a go kit is, how to have a go kit. And then home, shelter in place. There's been more talk about that. There's a balance with bad weather, whether you want people stay in their home, do the best that they can, versus leaving and going to a shelter. So a lot of times in the midst of the storm, you don't want people going out on the roads while the storm is happening or the flood initially is happening. But once the bad weather stops, you may perhaps need to go. But in the meantime, do you have what you need at home? Do you have extra food, water? Do you have a heat source or blankets or something that will keep your family safe and warm at this time? Chain of command, we talk a lot about. This is really talking about a high level. And this is how the Medical Reserve Corps may be activated. The governor is up there at the top, and then the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, or MEMA. A lot of times you've probably heard about FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It could be a city or town official that may ask for help and call up the Medical Reserve Corps. Could be the city or town emergency management director, who could be a separate agency person, or could be the fire chief or the police chief. The incident commander, someone that you would talk to if you were a leader. If you're a leader, you talk directly there, not someone who's just volunteering and helping out. This is what the chain of command gives you information about. These are just other people that we may work with out in the community. You've got your emergency medical services, it could be police, fire. We're not out there fighting those fires, but we may be at a shelter. We may be bringing food or water. You know, there's a different level. We're just not on the front lines, but we're the support personnel. Or as in the case of the marathon, there were people that were out there, but they had training and they knew how to respond. This is just a little brief piece. Anybody who's taken incident command system knows this intimately. But for anyone who hasn't, this is just talking about the structure. This is what you learn, where your place is within the incident command system, and who you'll wind up speaking to, who will be your commander, and where you'll find yourself. When we do flu clinics, a lot of times we may be an incident commander, a lot of times not, because we're usually in operations because we want to make sure that the work gets done and let somebody else be at the very top, or we get down and dirty and, you know, get the work done that needs to be done. And then there's planning. Logistics is supplies, you know, having supplies for what you need. And then, of course, finance and administration. That's easy. There is no finance, at least for public health. But we try. And then administration is for planning. So the role of MRC and emergencies: provide support and assistance when existing systems become overwhelmed. Formally requested and formally deployed. It is not self-deploying. And so it is something that sometimes we are requested ahead of time. Some of my volunteers have helped out in our emergency operations center, manning phone lines during a snow emergency. So we had to plan for that ahead of time. When we've had flu clinics, we've had to plan for that ahead of time. But there are disasters. We've had volunteers that assisted in the ice storms. When the tornado hit Springfield, we've had some of our volunteers go to Springfield to be able to assist. Those are the types of things that we have been involved in. Other possible ones is surge support, or taking care of things after something has happened. We say, God forbid, that any of those happen in our area, but you never know. So we talk about it. And a lot of things that we teach are something that's applicable for a smaller level as well as a larger level. So we start off with the basics first. Mass casualty, that's what happened with the marathon bombing. That's what would happen if there was a train wreck. That might happen when they had the parade and the car went into the people marching. That's when there's multiple people. And so we would not be there taking the people unless you were on the scene. But we might be back at a family unification shelter, a place where people are waiting to find out what happened. Mass dispensing, that was the flu clinics. We were dispensing flu vaccinations. Mass sheltering, we are definitely involved in that, and we have been involved with that for a number of years, and we hope to get volunteers trained for that. We have volunteers that work with registration, with playing with the children. It is so amazing how important that is to have children in a shelter occupied. So Jackie has a wonderful volunteer who has boxes of games and puzzles and things like that she brings with her to the shelters to keep them distracted and have something to do in a very stressful situation. They might serve food, different things like that. That's just to give you an example. This talks about communication protocols. Some of the things we want people to know is that we do not want people talking to the press ever, unless that's something that's been approved of. If you have been asked something that you feel that you're comfortable with, you check with your team leader. They'd like to ask me this, I'm comfortable with this. But we really want to say there's what's known as a public information officer. If you've taken the training, you'll know who that is. That's the person that really should be speaking for a situation only, unless it's a personal thing such as asking a volunteer outside of, say, a shelter, you know, how are you feeling about volunteering or something like that. We much prefer you say no comment rather than trying to think of something. It's better to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you, or I'll get someone who might know that answer for you. We don't want people to be put in a position that they're uncomfortable and should be giving information that perhaps they shouldn't be. Misinformation is a terrible thing. We can just look at that mine disaster where there was the word that the people were okay, but they really weren't. That type of thing. That's why it's so important to know what you're talking about. Learn radio, communicate clearly. We had an issue. The first flu clinic I had, we were not trained. We found that not enough of us knew what we were doing, and we were trying to talk, and everybody's not knowing what they're doing. So that was in the plan, okay, so that the next flu clinic, people knew how to use those walkie-talkies, because it was so clear to us that we did not know what we were doing. And we're just talking about communicate with each other. One of the things that I had talked about the role of the leaders in communicating to you, and then your role as a volunteer is also to communicate back to us, to let us know if any of your contact information changes. It may be that you had signed up to be a volunteer and in a couple of months you have a family crisis and you know there's no way, and you couldn't even deal with the emails that are sent out. Let us know. We'll put you on a standby. We have what we call an inactive file until things change, and then you come back to us, because we always hope you're going to come back to us. This is something psych and behavioral health. We offer trainings with those. This is really important. There is stress that happens with a disaster, and stress is normal. And part of it is knowing that how to help someone with this. And we'll be offering trainings actually next fall. We'll be doing trainings on what's called psychological first aid, and that's what to do in a disaster, because one of the scariest things is not knowing how to help someone and thinking that in a disaster that, well, somebody who knows what they're doing should be there, should be talking to the people. But what they've proven is that you do not do any type of clinical work during a disaster. You're just there to be a helping hand, an ear, maybe offering water. And those trainings help with that. First time I went to one, I was like, phew, okay, took the burden right off. I didn't feel like I needed to be able to give wisdom or comfort. Just being next to someone is comfort, not having to actually try to help somebody cope. And some of it's letting them know it's okay to be feeling bad and to be upset. Because in a disaster, it is a disaster and there's stress. So this just talks about some of the things that you can do, that it's normal to see different extremes. We talked about, I mentioned the activation deployment. What is that? Well, that's the actual formal process of going to help another unit. When we had people that were going to help out in the ice storms, this was something that there was a request from the state. The state sent out saying that they needed volunteers who would be able to help in Fitchburg and Leominster. And then at our level, we sent out emails to say they need help in shelters in the area in Fitchburg, Leominster. We actually didn't know the exact which ones. And so we sent that out, and then we got information where people were to report, who they were supposed to talk to. We have deployment orders that give you that information, so you would know who you're going to speak to, how long you're going to be going, what your job is, who you should be relieving, that type of thing. So it's, like I said, we don't want people to self-deploy. What that means is that you go by an accident and decide to run up and say, I'm an MRC volunteer, I can help you. That's not right. Good Samaritan, anybody certainly can volunteer, but as far as the Medical Reserve Corps, that is something that's formally activated. And we'll give you that information. We have the information about that. We contact our volunteers. A lot of times it's through email. If you do not have email, let us know, because we use phone contacts as well for people. I have some people that I know don't have emails, so I call them to give them the information. We ask, as I said, keep your contact information up to date, and the response is organized by us at this level. Just go next. Volunteer opportunities, you'll probably see more volunteer opportunities than deployments because there's a lot of public health initiatives out there. There's road races and health fairs. There's dental clinics. There's the Veterans Operations Stand Down. There's a number we have in each of our community. Foxborough has Founders Day. There's something for every community where there's an opportunity. In North Attleboro, we have a block party. I have a tent, and we do blood pressures for anybody who's going by and pass out health information as well as emergency preparedness information. I have things on what a Go Kit is, what kind of supplies you should have in your house, and I have volunteers that help pass that information as well as recruiting to try to get more volunteers that might be interested. Personal limitation awareness. This is very, very important. One of our predecessors, one of Cheryl Cates, she used to be Bushnell, who actually spoke on the DVD earlier, she always used the example of limitation awareness. If you are in a situation and you're headed this way and everybody else is going this way, turn around and go with them. Don't keep going. Be aware of what's going on around you. Be aware of yourself and what you're able to do. If you have come to help out, if you know you can't do more than 8 hours, maybe it's supposed to be a 12-hour shift, you let us know. There's no way I could do 12 hours. I might be able to do 8 hours. Let us know if you need to sit or if you need to stand. All these types of things to make us know what you're able to do, and we'll find a job for you because there's jobs of every different kind. We also don't want people to be doing something they're not comfortable with. If we have a nurse that's helping out, like when we had our flu clinics, someone who perhaps has not given any vaccinations and don't feel comfortable, they can still volunteer, but we might have them in screening. We might have them be watching people to make sure they don't develop reactions or things like that. We don't want someone being put in a position where they feel unsafe or do something that's unsafe. We do offer just-in-time trainings. What that means is that when you come to a situation, we have trainings that will tell you what the situation is, what you'll be doing, who you'll report to, what the length of time. It's called just-in-time because a lot of situations need some just-in-time. So we just talk about your responsibility is to protect yourself first. We can't do that for you, and we want you to do that, and let us know. You know your limitations. This slide here is just our reference and contact page. There's the directors, Deborah Vell, Donna Palmer. Our email, you can email us anytime, and one of the coordinators will get back to you. Information about the Bristol Collaborative. Our webpage there, bristolnorfolkmrc.org. That's where we put our trainings up there. We have pictures up there. National level. There's a lot of information out there. If you want to know a little bit more, please, go to those sites, check it out. Just wrote that again. And then just ending with, history has shown that together as one nation, we can rise up from any disaster. With a strong Medical Reserve Corps and advanced planning and training, we can be ready, and maybe less lives will be lost. And also quality of life. Any questions? Thank you very much.